You probably need to stop switching stances. But I like to switch stances to confuse my opponents. First of all, that's not what's happening. It doesn't do that. That's not, when you switch stances, that's not, your opponents are not confused. I'll explain what actually happens in a second. But if you think things like that consciously to yourself, or worse, you say them out loud, or even worser, you type it on the internet, you need to stop switching stances. Now, when I'm talking about switching stances, I'm talking about in the context of like sparring or fighting, MMA, kickboxing, Muay Thai, switching from orthodox to southpaw. In this video, I'm going to explain why you should not do that. I'm going to explain exactly what you should do when someone does that to you. And in typical hard to hurt fashion, I'm probably going to end up explaining why you should switch stances. That's probably going to happen. Now, this is a comment that I see all the time, but it's not just keyboard warrior stuff. This is stuff that I see real live people do in real life. Professional fighters, I see them do this. And it's always out in the middle of nowhere. It's always just like, they just do it for no discernible reason. It's not a strategic choice. They'll be orthodox. Usually they're sparring with someone that they're better than, and they're beating them up anyway. And they're like, I'm gonna switch stances now. And they think that some like, circuit gets shorted in their opponent's brain, and the guy's like, I don't know what to do now because the guy's like standing another way. He's not confused. He just has less practice making entry against that. So switching to southpaw a lot of times has a false positive effect, like we've talked about before on this channel, where you do something that's dumb and it works out for you, thereby reinforcing the idea that you should do dumb shit. And switching stances, absent any strategic tactical choice or just adapting to where your feet currently are, you know, being more stance fluid rather than bistantial, just allowing your feet to go where they are and fighting from that position, however you end up, you know, that's sensible. That's something you should do. But just going like this and then be like, I'm gonna go like this some. That's not a thing. This works on people that you're better than, like that beginner, intermediate, even advanced. And who we're talking about, let's say anyone from a guy who's just started sparring up to, you know, high-level amateur, regional pro type area, you know, not on TV. That's who we're talking about. They'll just switch. They're standing this way, and then they'll just decide they want to stand this way. For no reason. Here's what you do. The instant their feet change, the very second their feet change, here's what you do. You get your lead foot to the outside of their lead foot. You cover their lead hand, cover their jab, mind their cross, mind the rear hand, and hit the gas. That's what you do right away, as soon as they change. And I know what you're thinking. Some nincompoop is like, you don't have to get your foot to the outside. Remember who we're talking about. We're not talking to Michael Venom Page stepping to the inside and still knocking people out. That's not who we're talking to. That's not the target audience. Don't think too hard about it. It's not complicated. When the guy's not that good, and here's how we know he's not that good, because he just switched stances for no reason. Step your foot to the outside, cover the jab, mind the cross, and hit the gas. Whatever that means. Punch, kick, knees, elbows, takedowns, whatever you do, as soon as they switch, hit the gas. Here's why. Generally, when a person has spent some time practicing in the opposite stance, and for most people that's going to be southpaw, they've spent some time practicing southpaw, they've worked on their offense. They've drilled punches and kicks, right? They know how to, let me do that, yeah, I should have warmed up before I did that. Right? They understand how to throw attacks. They have an offense, but they don't have a defense. The defense is completely different. The footwork is different. The angles are different. The positions of the hands are all different when you're in the opposite stance of your opponent. Most people's defense is underdeveloped in their unnatural stance. Some righty will switch to southpaw and have a bunch of cool combos. You know, he'll have a bunch of cool stuff that he likes to do, you know, kicking the outside leg and getting that body shot. But when he's pressured, they kind of don't have an answer because they haven't practiced that much, because they've been practicing fighting Southpaw against people that they are better than and could beat up anyway. Therefore, their defense gets underdeveloped. When you pressure them immediately, when people get pressured and they don't have practice at something, they will revert back to what they know. So if a guy goes Southpaw in front of you, foot to the outside, cover the jab, mind the cross, hit the gas, he'll be forced to switch back. So when should we do this? And not only am I contradicting myself within this video, I'm contradicting advice that I typically give unless you're really paying attention. You should practice your Southpaw stuff when you are training and sparring with people who are better than you. Now, this is going to be confusing because I've always said you should experiment on people that you are better than and work on your fundamentals and basics with people that are better than you. When you spar the new guy, you should try some whimsical shit. When you spar your coach, don't get too cute. Keep it basic, keep it simple, keep it fundamental. When you spar with a guy who you are higher level than and you switch to Southpaw, you can do whatever you want anyway. When you're sparring with your coach or with a senior student and you want to switch to Southpaw, you have to keep it simple. You have to observe the fundamentals, not your fundamentals, the fundamentals of being a Southpaw. You're essentially starting over unless you spent half the time training Orthodox and half the time training Southpaw, which, by the way, if you do that, you probably can't fight. An Orthodox fighter switching to Southpaw or vice versa is not a trick. That's the problem, is people treat it like a trick. They treat it like oh, let me just pull this trick out. Now I'm like this. It's like they think they're in The Princess Bride, and it's like, but I'm not really left-handed. It's not a trick. It's a completely different game. You are playing a completely different game when you stand Southpaw versus Orthodox. It's not just the same shit on the other side. That's why I laugh at people who say they practice both sides equally. Unless you are an absolute phenom, which you are probably not, you need to return to zero, to the beginning, and completely change your game and fight as a Southpaw. Now, when you've done that, you understand the difference between whatever your Orthodox game is and whatever your Southpaw game is, and then you learn to marry the two. Then you learn to fill in the gaps, the transitions, how to get to one place from the other. If you want some drills on switching stances, I've got that up there. Once you've done all that, then you can start to be more fluid and not have to intentionally decide when to switch. You just switch because you're supposed to, because you need to in that moment. Or maybe your footwork gets messed up and you just are capable of fighting from either stance.